Every once in a while, somebody from a long time ago will tell you a story about yourself. And you'll have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They'll say, "You always used to do that." And you'll think, "I did?" Or they'll describe what you were like back then. Maybe they'll tell you you were funny, or quiet, or confident, or a little full of yourself. And sometimes you just have to ask, was I really like that? That's a strange feeling. Because you think of all the people in the world, you'd be the one who remembers you best. But I'm not so sure that's true. I think about myself at 18 years old. I didn't have a tremendous amount of self-confidence then. I never really considered myself especially smart or articulate. Apparently, other people did. My father certainly seemed to. My dad pumped gas for a living for a long time. He worked in a parking garage for many years. He was a hard-working guy, and I think there was always this understanding between us that he expected me to do better than he had. Not be better than him. Do better. Get a good job. Something secure. Build a life for myself. When I got a job at the phone company, he was ecstatic. He bragged to all of his friends. I remember that, and looking back now, I realized something. The 18-year-old I remember and the 18-year-old my father knew may not have been exactly the same person. I remember the uncertainty. He may have seen the potential. Which one of us was right? Probably both. There was something else about me when I was 18 years old. I was pretty insecure about my looks, like probably a lot of kids. I never really thought of myself as particularly handsome. It wasn't until much later in life that I could look back at a picture of that kid and think, what exactly were you worried about? Turns out, I wasn't nearly as bad looking as I apparently thought I was at the time. I think some of that might have been humility, maybe a little insecurity, and some of it was probably just being 18. And I'll bet many of you felt the same way. Maybe it wasn't your looks. Maybe you thought you weren't smart enough or popular enough or even interesting enough. Maybe you thought everybody else had something figured out that you didn't. And then years later, you look back and you realize maybe you weren't seeing yourself very clearly at all. The people around you weren't looking at you through all of that insecurity. They just saw you. Sometimes it takes becoming a different version of yourself to finally understand the person you used to be. And here's the really strange part. You never met yourself. You've never experienced what happens when you walk into a room. You've never known what your presence feels like to somebody else. But other people have. Your parents knew one version of you. Your friends knew another. Someone you fell in love with, they knew another. And somebody you haven't spoken to in 40 years may still have a remarkably clear picture of a person you barely remember being. Of course, it works the other way too. Think about somebody you haven't seen since high school. Really picture them. They're probably young in your mind. You know they've gotten older. They lived an entire life since then. But somehow, in your mind, they're still 18. Then one day you see them again after 40 years and you think, good Lord, what happened to him? And about 2 seconds later comes the uncomfortable realization. He's looking at you too. Two people can meet again after 40 years, and yet there are almost four people in the conversation. The two people that they are now, and the two people they remember. And something else happens. Within a few minutes, an old nickname comes back. The old jokes come back. Maybe even the way you talk changes a little bit. You haven't behaved that way in years, and suddenly, there it is. It's almost like muscle memory. I call it social muscle memory. That person brings out something that's been sitting untouched for decades. Maybe that's because there isn't just one version of us. Different people bring different parts of us to the surface. At 18, I wanted to be friendly, approachable, and sought after by girls. I was particularly committed to the last one. The girls, unfortunately, had some input into the matter. But the person I wanted people to see wasn't necessarily the person that I thought I was. And neither one may have been exactly the person that they actually saw. Maybe that's just part of being human. We spend a lot of our lives trying to figure out who we are, while everyone around us is quietly forming their own answer. And then life moves on. Friends drift apart. Jobs change. Families change. Some people we simply never see again. But they leave something behind. Because we are, at least in part, the sum of our experiences. And most of those experiences involved other people. The person who believed in you. The friend who could make you laugh. The person you desperately wanted to impress. The person who broke your heart. They all leave something, don't they? And we leave something with them. Maybe that's why sometimes we don't just miss a person. We miss who we were when we were that person. There's a version of you that existed around your childhood friends, around your parents, maybe another around somebody you once loved. Those versions weren't fake. They were you. And some of those people may remember things about you you've completely forgotten. Think about this. You are the only person who has been present your entire life. And even if you don't remember all of it, other people are carrying pieces. A story? Or a joke? Something kind you did that you barely remember. Maybe something stupid you wish they'd forget. A version of you who was more confident than you remember. Or less. They're carrying little pieces of your life that you no longer have. And maybe we shouldn't be so hard on those earlier versions of ourselves. I mean, it's easy to look backwards and think, God, I was an idiot. And sometimes that's not the philosophical reflection, right? Sometimes you really were an idiot. I know I was. But that kid didn't know what you know. He hadn't had your experiences yet. He hadn't met all the people who were going to change him. He was doing this all for the very first time. Just like you are now. You know, sometimes I think about that 18-year-old who wanted to make his father proud. He thought getting a secure job meant he was headed in the right direction. He wasn't particularly sure he was smart. He wasn't particularly sure he was articulate. I know things now that he couldn't possibly have known. But he had something I don't have anymore. He could sit down and talk to my father. And my father knew him. Not from a photograph, not from a story. He knew that version of me because he was there. Maybe that's what people from our past really are. You know, they're witnesses. Witnesses to people we used to be. And we're witnesses to the people they used to be. Maybe none of us carries the complete story of who we are. Other people carry pieces. And occasionally, if we're lucky, somebody from a long, long time ago hands one of those pieces back. You always used to do that. And we laugh. And we shake our head. And we ask, was I really like that? Yeah, maybe you were. And maybe that person is still in there somewhere. Not waiting to come back. Just part of the long line of people that you had to be. To become the person that you are now.